Today in Duskmourn, we get a super Panharmonicon room, an Impending Inferno Titan, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Duskmourn spoilers. So we got some early spoilers on Friday, but today we officially kick off week 1 of Duskmourn spoilers, and we have some super cool stuff to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Duskmourn cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Duskmourn. First up today, we get the red member of the Mythic Impending cycle in Overlord of the Boilerbilges. And this card is very close to Inferno Titan at home, I guess. It's a 6-mana 5/5 enchantment creature. It's an avatar horror. It is Impending 4/4, so you can play it as an enchantment for 4 mana, wait 4 turns of removing time counters for it to become a creature, and then when it enters or attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target. So honestly, very similar to Inferno Titan. Same mana cost. The downside is it's only a 5/5 instead of a 6/6. It doesn't have fire breathing. Damage-wise, I think it's roughly equal. Inferno Titan deals less damage, only 3 damage, but you can split it up and like snipe a creature, throw some at face, hit multiple creatures. Overlord deals more damage, 4 damage, but it's all going in one place. The biggest upside of Overlord is definitely the Impending mode. Inferno Titan always going to be 6 mana. Overlord though, you can play it for 4, deal 4 damage to something, maybe kill something, and eventually turn it into a creature. So I would say this is very close to being on par with Inferno Titan. I would say Inferno Titan's probably like slightly better, but Inferno Titan isn't in standard, hasn't been in standard for a long time. This is still a very, very good card. I will say, 4 damage for 4 mana, not great. That's essentially a Flame Lash, which was never an especially playable card, and I do have some concerns about how it lines up with some of the popular cards in standard. Like, for 4 mana dealing 4 damage means this can't kill a Biza, it can't kill Shieldred, obviously can't kill an Atraxa, which is a bit of a concern. It is good at sniping smaller creatures though, which is nice, and then if you can get to 6 mana and cast this and start attacking with it or haste it in, it can close out the game really, really quickly, and that's one of the upsides of Inferno Titan. It used to see play in like modern Panza because it's just such a fast clock. After you blow up your opponent's lands and kind of disrupt them, you want to be able to close out the game quickly. Imagine like casting this, having some way to give it haste. It gets 4 damage when it ETBs, 4 more when it attacks, and it's a 5/5. That's potentially 13 damage all in one turn if you can haste this in. So even though as a removal spell, it's kind of medium, it's really, really nice that it can go face, and this card can still close out games. So where would this card fit in standard? I think the most obvious home would be in the Smuggler's Surprise deck, like the Gruul Smuggler's Supplies ramp deck. This kind of works like another Trumpeting Carnosaur as an expensive card that works well with Smuggler's Surprise, but also can be played earlier as a removal spell. Works with Outcaster Trailblazer, works with Calamity, so I think I'd play some number there. Maybe not the full 4 copies, but an extra 4 mana removal spell that also supports the synergy of your deck seems pretty powerful. I will also say, I've seen some people saying that this is the worst member of this cycle so far, and that might be true. Like, Overlord of the Hauntwoods seems really strong. Overlord of the Mistmoors seems good. Overlord of the Boilerbilges, that seems like fine. Although I will point out that when we saw the Evoke Elementals for Modern Horizons 2, I thought that Fury was the weakest of that cycle, and Fury was the one that first got banned in Modern and like dominated the format. Turns out being able to throw damage at things and being a removal spell that leaves behind a body can actually be super powerful. So I think this card might be a little underrated right now. I'm kind of surprised at how many people are like, oh, it's a bad Inferno Titan, oh, this card's horrible. I think this card's actually good. Like, I'm not saying it's busted or anything, but this seems like a very playable card, and I think people might be sort of sleeping on it based on the initial reaction to this card. The other thing I want to mention outside of standard is this card's super cute in the Enigmatic Incarnation decks. Really, the whole Impending mechanic works really well with this, but Enigmatic Incarnation, it wants you to sack an enchantment, and then you get to get a creature of that enchantment's mana value +1. So the trick here is you can play Overlord with this Impending cost, but it's going to technically be a 6 mana value enchantment. So then you just go to your end step and sack it to Enigmatic Incarnation. You even get some removal when you played it, and then find an Atrox or another 7-drop. So it's going to be interesting to see what this does in the like 4 or 5 color Enigmatic Incarnation decks in a format like Pioneer. In Commander, I think this card's actually kind of bad. Like, I don't play Inferno Titan very much in Commander, and I think that this is, like I said before, slightly worse than Inferno Titan. So if I'm not playing the better version, I'm probably not going to play the worse version, although there are a couple of exceptions. This works pretty well in decks that specifically care about mana value stuff. Like the most obvious home is Bellow Bard of the Brambles, which wants you to play non-aura enchantments and also non-equipment artifacts with mana value 4 or greater to turn them into 4/4s. So in Bellow, you can play this for 4 mana as an impending cost. It's a 6 mana value card, so it's going to work with Bellow. Bellow's going to turn it into an actual creature, and then you're able to attack with it and get its attack trigger. So it seems really solid there. Also could be good in Henzi, where it's expensive enough that you can like blitz it into play, get a bunch of damage. So I think that's another possibility, but I don't think I would just play this in a generic red deck, just because I don't really play Inferno Titan effects in generic red decks either. So Overlord, I think this card is going to be good in Standard. I don't think it's busted or anything, but I think people are underrating it a bit. 4 damage is fine. It's not going to kill everything, but being able to go face is nice. The Impending mode is nice, and if you can ramp into this and get it on the battlefield, it is a really, really fast clock for closing out the game. Next up, a new mythic room enchantment, our blue mythic room enchantment. I assume there's a cycle of these with one in each color, in Mirrored Room / Fractured Realm. So the cheap side of this one, Mirror Room, when it unlocks, you get to create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it's a reflection in addition to its other creature types. The expensive side, for 7 mana, Fractured Realm. If a triggered ability of a permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So if you think about what Mirrored Room / Fractured Realm really is, it's essentially a quasi-duplicate, like sorcery speed, clone a creature for 3 mana, which is fine. Quasi-duplicate was never a staple or anything, but it does have some really sneaky synergies. And then the backside, or the expensive side, Fractured Realm, is like a super Panharmonicon. This is, I believe, the strongest version of the Panharmonicon effect we've ever seen, because it's worded like Roaming Throne or Annie Joins Up, where it works with literally any triggered ability, so it's not restricted to ETB triggers or attack triggers or anything like that, and it isn't restricted to legends like Annie Joins Up or a certain creature type like Roaming Throne. So this is like an Annie Joins Up or Roaming Throne for literally everything. So even though it is 7 mana, this is the best version of the Panharmonicon effect we've ever seen. So like I said, it kind of is like if you mash together a Panharmonicon with a Ishin because it doubles attack triggers and a Felix because it doubles combat damage triggers, smash all that together and you have Fractured Room. It also works pretty well with itself. It's worth mentioning that rooms themselves have triggered abilities. We got another one that kind of shows off maybe like, has room support as one of the themes in this app. But if you think about what this means, let's say you play Fractured Realms first. So you play this 7 mana side. So you're going to double up your triggered abilities. Mirror Room, when you unlock it, is a triggered ability. It's going to trigger to copy one of your creatures. But if you already have Fractured Realm unlocked, you're going to be able to take and double trigger it. So you get 2 copies of a creature, or a copy of 2 different creatures. So I think that's kind of neat. And this works with all the other room enchantments. So we got like Smokey's Lounge / Misty Salon. Smokey's Lounge makes mana for your rooms, and then Misty Salon's gonna make a big creature based on how many rooms you have unlocked. So I don't think that like rooms are likely to be a legit standard deck, but it might be a limited archetype, or at least a fun against the odds deck. So maybe we can build a deck that's around that, and I think that's part of the goal of Fractured Realm. Yes, we can use it like a super Panharmonicon doing other things, but it's also a really good support card for the room archetype in specific, because all of these rooms have all these triggered abilities that you can double up. So in Standard, I think the big question is, we got a lot of Panharmonicons, right? So unless you're specifically built around rooms, is it worth playing Fractured Realm over Alishorn Mother of Machines or Virtue of Knowledge or Annie Joins Up? And I think the answer is, it really depends on the deck. So it is tough that Fractured Realm is 7 mana. It is nice that you can get it on the board early with Mirror Room and make a copy of something, maybe a copy of a ramp spell or something, so you can ramp into the second half of it. But I still think Elish Norn is like the S tier Panharmonicon in Standard. But I do think think that Fractured Realm, once you get on the battlefield, it can do ridiculous things. Like, we found out with Echoes of Eternity, which is another really expensive Panharmonicon effect, but only for colorless things, that once you get it on the battlefield, just double triggering everything leads to some ridiculous board states. So if you can actually get Fractured Room unlocked on the battlefield, you're gonna do some insane things. Like, just think about everything this does. Like, sure, you do the Panharmonicon thing and double up your Deep Cavern Mat trigger or whatever, but you also double up your Ouroboros Forge triggers, making multiple tokens. You double trigger Shieldred to drain your opponent, gain a bunch of life. You double trigger the counters from Innkeeper's Talent, the pseudo prowess from Slickshot show off, the reanimation from Virtue of Persistence. There's so many things with triggered abilities that you don't even really think about them. They just happen all the time in a game of Magic, and with each of those being doubled up, you're gonna win the game really, really quickly. So I think this card is super powerful. I expect this is gonna be one of the cards that we build around the most in the set, and I love how it synergizes with itself, where you can like get down a creature with the ETB trigger and use Mirror Room to copy it, maybe with Fractured Realm open to double up the ETB trigger, plus you double up the creature with the Mirrored Room. It can just snowball super, super hard. I've been messing around. You probably saw the Against Odds last week with Fecund Greenshell, where we're just playing like Panharmonicon stuff and all these ETB triggers, Clifftop Lookouts and Dream Dew Entrancers. Mirror Room and Fractured Realm seem absolutely perfect for the deck. We have tons of creatures that are worth copying to get more value out of them. The Panharmonicon triggers are going to go wild, so I think I would play some number there. We do have Elesh Norn in the deck, so we already have a Panharmonicon, but I would definitely try to sneak in a couple of Mirror Rooms to go alongside Elesh Norn. I've also been messing around with Iridescent Vinelasher Panharmonicon decks, with the idea being your Panharmonicons can double up Offspring. So if you can Offspring Iridescent Vinelasher, you're going to with 3 copies, and then every land will also double trigger, so you're dealing a ridiculous amount of damage. Fractured Realms and Mirror Room seem perfect there as well. It's another way we can copy the Vinelasher, and then every land is going to double trigger. It's just going to get super crazy super fast. So I think there's multiple homes for this card in Brews and Standard. I don't think this is a card that any top tier deck is currently going to play, but we're certainly going to find fun things to do with it. In Commander, we have seen Roaming Throne and Annie Joins Up kind of become instant staples. Like, Roaming Throne goes in so many decks, Annie Joins Up, if you're a Naya, goes in so many decks. It turns out a lot of commanders have triggered abilities in one way or another, and doubling them up is really, really powerful. So I think there's definitely homes for Mirror Room there as well. You can play it in traditional Panharmonicon decks like Yarok. It works with Dragons and Mirrors. You can double up the damage from Nekuzar. There's so many places this card goes. So I expect worst case, absolute worst case, this is going to be a really popular commander card. Like, people just love doubling their triggers. Plus, you get to copy one of your creatures too. So it kind of combines together two things that commander players just really love doing. So I expect we're going to see a lot of this card in Commander. Even outside of traditional Panharmonicon homes, the other places could work is an enchantment based decks. You could play it in like Estrid or whatever, because it is an enchantment, probably going to be at its best in enchantment decks that also have commanders with triggered abilities. So like a Goshen Tie of Life's Origins, for example. Every one of your shrines is going to make 2 shrines, plus you can copy something, or Tzova, you're able to double draw cards with it whenever you cast your first enchantment of the turn, so it works well there too. So I think Mirror Room and Fractured Realm, the card's super sweet. One of my favorite cards, unsurprisingly, from this set so far. I'm a little worried that the Panharmonicon, the super Panharmonicon mode, is 7 mana, which is a lot, but I think the flexibility of how rooms work, essentially being split cards, and just the way it's worded, being like the ultimate Panharmonicon wording, still has me really excited for this card, even though it is a little bit expensive to get it fully unlocked. We also got a interesting new zombie in Undead Sprinter. So 2 mana in Rakdos for a 2/2 zombie, and it's Trample and Haste, and it says you can cast it from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn. If you do, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's a 3/3 Trample Haste from your graveyard, a 2/2 Trample Haste from your hand. So this card, my only concern with it is in Rakdos, which might make it a little tricky to find a home for it, but this card I think is very, very good. We've talked many times before about how 2 mana 2/2 hasters tend to be good in Standard. We see that now with Feltons, and we had Bloodthirsty Adversary and Emberheart Challenger. I've even seen people playing cards like Red Herring or Cunning Coyote, which are kind of like the lowest tier of 2/2 hasters. So I feel like just being a 2/2 haster, that by itself makes me interested in this card for an aggro deck in Standard. We've also seen recursive threats be really good. Grave Crawlers, or Tenacious Underdogs, or Mosswood Dread Knights. And Undead Sprinter combines those two things together. You get the hasty aggression of the 2/2 haster, but you also get the grindy recursiveness of cards like Gravecrawler and Tenacious Underdog and Mosswood Dread Knight. When you add all that together, I think this is actually a very strong card. It's fine on turn 2, and then in the late game, you're going to be able to be getting this back every turn. Also, has the upside that you can block with it, which kind of makes it a little bit Mosswood Dread Knightian. Like Gravecrawler can't block, Tenacious Underdog, if you blitz it, it's only an offense, so it can't block. Undead Sprinter, you can play on defense if you want to, where if you're about to die, you can like kill one of your opponent's creatures, cast this from the graveyard, have a 3/3 break on defense to jump with, maybe the next turn do it again. So I feel like when you combine all that together, this has a look of a card that should be a Standard staple. My only problem with the card is in some ways it's not quite as good as it looks. So if you think about Trample and Haste, if you were casting it from the graveyard, the easiest way to have a creature die is going to be just to have them trade off in combat. You attack your opponent with a bunch of stuff, they block something, something dies, then you can cast your Undead Sprinter. The thing is, it's going to be during your post-combat main phase, so haste isn't really going to do anything if you're casting this post-combat. So I think it's going to be even better if you're in some sort of sack deck where you're able to like sack something pre-combat, get back your Undead Sprinter, or even better, this works with your opponent's creatures dying, which is what really sold me on this card. It's not when a non-zombie creature you control dies, it's when any non-zombie creature dies, which means you can cut down your opponent's thing and then cast the Undead Sprinter. You can go for the throat your opponent's thing and then cast the Undead Sprinter, which makes this way more flexible than something like a Gravecrawler, which cares specifically about your board. This allows you to do what you want to do anyway, which is kill your opponent's things and be able to cast it from the graveyard. The only question I have for this is, where do we play it in Standard? So if you look at Standard decks right now, the number one Rakdos deck is Lizards, and I guess you could play this in Lizards, but that would be kind of weird. I don't know why you would play a non-Lizard card in the Lizard deck, because it's so based on synergy, so it's probably not going to fit there. The other big Rakdos deck is Infamous Cruel Claw decks, but Infamous Cruel Claw really wants all this big expensive stuff, right, to work with Cruel Claw's ability, so I don't think it fits there. So that's my only concern for this card, is I don't know if we have a home for it. I think it is very much of a power level to be really good in Standard, but it doesn't work in Lizards, doesn't work with Cruel Claw, so we're going to need some sort of new Rakdos aggro, non-Lizard generic deck to develop to have a home for Undead Sprinter, or some sort of Aristocrat deck, some Sacrifice deck. I think we have the pieces to make it work, and maybe Undead Sprinter is a card that puts the archetype over the top. It does work really well with discard effects. Like, you can see the pieces for a Rakdos aggro deck, like Inti, for example. You can pitch your Undead Sprinter to the Inti to get card advantage and counter and trample something up and then cast it from the graveyard. You can Charming Scoundrel into the graveyard. You can take up a Liliana to get it in the graveyard and then get it back. So there's a ton of synergy with some of the best Rakdos cards in the format. So I think we're going to have to wait and see, but I expect we're going to see people try to build straight up Rakdos aggro, in large part because of the power of Undead Sprinter. Also worth mentioning, it's pretty cute against discard if you're a best of one Standard player and tired of getting Bandit's Talent and having your opponent, discard all your cards. This is kind of a free discard because you know you're going to get it back later. So this is a card that you can easily discard to a Bandit's Talent or whatever, knowing that eventually it's going to come back as a threat. In older formats, I'm less excited for the card. So it looks like a zombie card, and it is a zombie, but its ability specifically doesn't work with zombies. So I don't think we're going to see this in the zombie decks in specific, just because zombie decks really want to be playing all zombies, so it's going to be hard to get it back from the graveyard. So I don't think it works in zombies. It could work in something like Rakdos Sack and Pioneer, where you're sacking your Cauldron Familiars. You're always going to be able to cast this from your graveyard. I just don't know if those decks have room, though. Like, the way the card is worded, it would synergize with that deck and be fine in the deck. Maybe we see some more like aggressive version of the sack deck emerge that could play this card, but my guess is this is mostly going to be a Standard card, but it is a very good one. Anytime you see a 2/2 haster for 2, you got to think, okay, this card might be Standard playable just based on its rate, and then you get the recursive ability, which just really puts it over the top. So Undead Sprinter, don't know exactly what deck it fits in yet. We're gonna have to build a deck for it, but it is a very strong card. We also got a pretty intriguing king cycle of common dual lands. So these are dual lands that make 2 colors of mana, and they come into play tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. So as far as common dual lands go, I think these ones are actually pretty reasonable. They're essentially slow lands. In the early game, always going to be tapped because players are at 20 life, but once the game goes along and people start losing life, these are going to come into play untapped relatively quickly. I would assume it's really matchup dependent, I guess, but by the mid game and definitely by the late game, someone should be down under 13, and then these will start coming to play untapped. So I don't think these are staples. I don't even think they're like going to see a ton of standard play, but as far as commons go, these are better than most common dual lands, because most common dual lands always enter the battlefield tap, like 100% of the time. These honestly might be better than Snarls, I will say. I think I might like them better than Snarls, and those were printed at rare to begin with. So I think the fact that some percentage of the time, and not even like that low of a percentage of a time, at least in 60 card formats, these are going to come into play untapped, makes them one of the better common dual land cycles. Sadly, no land types. If these were fetchable too, probably be the best common dual land cycle. But even without the land types, as far as commons go, if you're trying to build like a budget deck on Arena or something, I think these are going to be go-to lands for budget players that just don't have the rares because they're just better than the other options. We also got another fear card, Fear of Isolation, a 2-mana 2/3 flying enchantment creature. This has is an additional cost to cast this spell. Return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. So if this card looks kind of familiar, it's essentially an updated blue core Skyfisher, or we've seen Nurturing Pixie with a similar ability, see play in our current standard, picking up like Bandit's talent. This card, I think if you're a deck that's looking to reuse a permanent, then I think this card could serve a purpose. A 2/3 flyer for 2, pretty good rate, and then if you're bouncing something like a Tiny Bones joins up or a Bandit's Talent or something like that you want to reuse anyway, then this downside of having to bounce one of your own things kind of becomes an upside. So not a staple, but we've seen Core Skyfisher see play in the past. We see Nurturing Pixie see some play right now, so a card to keep in mind for specific decks. It's close enough and good enough at doing its job. If that's what you're trying to do, to pick up your own permanents for value, then Fear of Isolation could certainly have a home in your deck. Also, of course, some draft chaff, stuff that I don't think is going to see competitive play. Out of these cards, there's 2 that I think have a chance in very specific decks. So one is Glimmer Seeker, 3-mana 3/3 with survival, says beginning your second main phase. If it's tapped, you draw a card if you control a Glimmer creature. If you don't control a Glimmer creature, you make a 1/1 Glimmer enchantment creature token. So this card is close enough that I could imagine if there's a deck where you're already playing Glimmers. I don't think you want to have to wait to make the 1/1 Glimmer to start drawing cards, but if you have other Glimmers in your deck, and if you can tap this without attacking, so maybe you're using it to saddle or to crew, then I can see this card being worth it. It is a really good crewer, really good saddler. You're going to start making tokens, you're going to start drawing cards, so I don't think it's just like a mono white staple or anything like that, but in the right context, I think it could be playable. The other one that's interesting is oddly another white 3-drop in Patched Plaything. So Patched Plaything, 3-mana white 4/3 toy with double strike, except it enters with 2 -1/-1 counters if you cast it from your hand. So if you just cast this, it's a 2/1 double strike for 3, not a playable card. But if you can find a way around those -1/-1 counters, a 4/3 double strike for 3 is actually very far above the curve. So maybe there's like a Blink deck or some sort of weird Reanimator deck that's using, I don't know, stuff that reanimates cheaper creatures. You don't really want to Cruelty of Gix this, but if you could like unearth it or whatever, then I could see this actually being pretty good just based on rate. The rest of the cards, I think, pretty much just rounding out the limited format. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Duskmourn spoilers for today. So what do you think of these cards? Which one are you most hyped about? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Duskmourn spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe check out the budget magic where we did some Necrotic Ooze comboing in Modern.